Colonel Sanders. Do you know KFC? Who doesn't? It's one of the most famous and widespread American fried chicken brands in the world. KFC was founded by Colonel Harland Sanders, an entrepreneur who began selling fried chicken from his roadside restaurant in Corbin, Kentucky during the Great Depression. Sanders identified the potential of the restaurant franchising concept, and the first Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise opened in Utah in 1952. Today, we will be talking about Colonel Sanders and some of his life, how he attained his net worth, and the idea for creating Kentucky Fried Chicken. Stay until the end to find out a surprising and nearly unknown fact about Colonel Sanders. Colonel Sanders, whose full name was Harland David Sanders, was born on September 9, 1890. He was born in a four-room house in Indiana, as the oldest of three children. His parents were Wilbur David and Margaret Ann Sanders, who are of Irish and Dutch descent. Sanders had a very Christian upbringing, and Margaret Ann Sanders was a very devout Christian. She was very strict and constantly warned Colonel Sanders about tobacco, gambling, alcohol, and whistling on Sundays, which she considered very evil things. Sanders' father had broken his leg after a fall and ended up dying in 1895. At an early young age, Harland Sanders had to cook for his siblings, which helped him develop his strong culinary skills. When he was barely 7 years old, he was skilled with bread and vegetables, meat, and other types of food. He had to start working at age 10, first as a farmhand until his family moved to Greenwood. An interesting fact about Colonel Sanders is that he dropped out of 7th grade back in 1903 as he considered that algebra was too hard and drove him off high school. He would go on to live and work at a nearby farm and left home at age 13. As you can see, Sanders had been getting used to working from a very young age, even working painting horse carriages in Indianapolis, and later as a farmhand once more. Later in his life, Sanders falsified his date of birth and enlisted in the United States Army in October 1906, completing his service commitment as a wagoner in Cuba. He was honorably discharged in February 1907 and moved to Sheffield, Alabama, where his uncle lived. There, he met his brother Clarence, who had also moved there in order to escape their stepfather, with whom Sanders never had a good relationship. Their uncle worked for the Southern Railway and secured Sanders a job there as a blacksmith's helper in the workshops. After 2 months, Sanders moved to Jasper, Alabama, where he got a job cleaning out the ash pans of trains from the Northern Alabama Railroad, a division of the Southern Railway, when they had finished their runs. As you can see from what we've been explaining, Colonel Sanders held a number of jobs in his early life, such as steam engine stoker, insurance salesman, and filling station operator. Sanders also found work in the Norfolk and Western Railway in 1910. While working on the railroad, he met Josephine King of Jasper, Alabama, not knowing that she would be his wife shortly afterwards. When they married, Sanders and Josephine King would go on to have a son named Harland Jr., who sadly died in 1932 from infected tonsils. They also had 2 daughters, Margaret Sanders and Mildred Sanders Ruggles. His next odd job was as a fireman on the Illinois Central Railroad, and he and his family moved to Jackson, Tennessee. By night, Sanders studied law by correspondence through the LaSalle Extension University. Sanders lost his job at Illinois after brawling with a colleague. While Sanders moved to work for the Rock Island Railroad, Josephine and the children went to live with her parents. Sanders' life was turning up when he began practicing law in Little Rock. He practiced there for 3 years, earning enough money for his family to move with him, though his legal career ended after a courtroom brawl with his own client. You can imagine that, as a lawyer, having a brawl with your client in the courtroom is enough to completely destroy your reputation. So Sanders was looking hopeless unless he found a new odd job. This was one of the lowest points for Sanders' life, as he found out that due to his lack of self-control, impatience and aggressiveness, he was experiencing failure after failure. Not only had he lost 2 jobs due to his bullheadedness, but also his career. At this point, Colonel Sanders had to move back in with his mother in Henryville, and luckily found work as a laborer on the Pennsylvania Railroad. He found another job selling life insurance for the Prudential Life Insurance Company, yet it seemed like he never really learned his lesson, as he was fired due to insubordination and had to find another job at sales with Mutual Benefit Life of New Jersey. Finally, he was starting to have some success by not working for someone else, but instead establishing his own businesses. Sanders established a ferryboat company, which operated a boat on the Ohio River between Jeffersonville and Louisville. He canvassed for funding, becoming a minority shareholder himself, and was appointed secretary of the company. The ferry was an instant success. Sanders cashed in his ferryboat company shares for $22,000. $330,000 today, and used the money to establish a company manufacturing acetylene lamps. The venture failed after Delco, another electric automotive company, introduced an electric lamp that it sold on credit. Come the Great Depression, the Shell Oil Company offered Sanders work at a service station, rent-free, in return for giving the company part of his earnings from sales. He also began serving chicken dishes and other meals at his living quarters, but then decided to open a restaurant. He had some competition, but he was involved in a shootout with Matt Stewart, his main competitor, over the repainting of a sign directing traffic to his station. And since Stewart accidentally killed a Shell employee accompanying Sanders, he was convicted and was out of the game, allowing Sanders to be commissioned as a Kentucky colonel, and grew his popularity. He began selling fried chicken from his roadside restaurant in North Corbin, Kentucky during the Great Depression. During that time, Sanders developed his secret recipe and his patented method of cooking chicken in a pressure fryer. Sanders recognized the potential of the restaurant franchising concept, and the first KFC franchise opened in South Salt Lake, Utah, in 1952. When his original restaurant closed, he devoted himself full-time to franchising his fried chicken throughout the country. During his first year selling Kentucky Fried Chicken, its restaurant sales more than tripled, and since it was based in Utah, the Kentucky Fried part was a hit with the locals, as it evoked imagery of Southern hospitality. Don Anderson coined the name Kentucky Fried Chicken. Several restaurant owners franchised the concept and paid Sanders $0.04 per chicken. Sanders believed that his North Corbin restaurant would remain successful indefinitely, but at age 65 sold it after the new Interstate 75 reduced customer traffic and it eventually closed. At this point, he was only left with his savings and Social Security cash, so he decided to travel the US to franchise his chicken concept. The franchise approach became highly successful. KFC was one of the first fast food chains to expand internationally, opening outlets in Canada and later in the UK, Mexico, and Jamaica by the mid-1960s, so much that he trademarked the phrase, "It's finger-licking good," in 1963. The company was an overnight success that expanded to over 600 locations. But before we finish our story about Colonel Sanders' life, here's a quick bonus fact about Colonel Sanders that not many people are aware of. By the time Kentucky Fried Chicken was growing popular, Sanders was an aging man and couldn't manage the corporation on his own. Instead of selling KFC to a partnership of Kentucky businessmen, thus becoming a salaried brand ambassador. While he did not manage the brand or the company himself, he was like influencers nowadays, instead remaining the company's symbol as you can admire on Kentucky Fried Chicken's logo. Sanders traveled around 200,000 miles a year on the company's behalf and filmed many TV commercials and advertisements, on top of still exerting a lot of influence over the company's executives and franchisees. Sanders made surprise visits to his restaurants late in his life, and if the food disappointed him, he would make it clear. Eventually, he died of acute leukemia and was buried in Kentucky in a funeral attended by more than 1,000 people. And that's the story of how Kentucky Fried Chicken was born from Colonel Sanders' crafty mind, and how today it is one of the most iconic fast food restaurants in the US, known for popularizing the concept of fast food in the first place. Though his life was full of ups and downs, in the end, he turned to be one of the most impressive success stories of the United States.